Hi, this is Alison Hicks and David C. Irons, my co-host. We are now in live studio with Bill Clutter from the Innocence Project. He is a private investigator with saving people's lives, and I will let Bill take it from here.
Okay.
Hi, Bill.
Thank you for inviting me on your program.
Glad you could make it.
Thank you.
And you want to talk about working on to exonerate the innocent tonight.
Exactly, yeah. And I understand that you have some expertise in the area. And another area that we discussed before the show is it's awful easy to criticize the police, but we have to have standards which are realistic. And sometimes it's not like CSI. Sometimes they do have to rely on other types of evidence. But let's talk a little bit about best practices. What type of investigation? What are the standards for investigators, and what are those best practices that should be followed in a capital crime investigation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the big problem is tunnel vision. People get, locked in on a theory, and oftentimes in these wrongful conviction cases, police will forge the facts to fit their theory, and they'll disregard evidence where that evidence might, in an objective investigation, actually lead to the apprehension of the real killer. And time after time, I see this in cases where police officers will lock in on a theory. They'll take the best available suspect and work to try to fit their case. And
on the other hand, to be fair, you can't follow every single lead, and they're often criticized for not following potential leads, but there's not enough time in the universe to cover every possible.
Well,
how do they narrow it down a little bit? And I definitely agree with the tunnel vision. That is certainly is the major problem.
Well, one of the things I'm seeing is in more recent cases that there are law enforcement investigations that do actually look at all the available suspects, and they treat them equally until they're able to eliminate them. And that's the way an investigation should proceed. They shouldn't be disregarding information just because it doesn't fit with their theory of the suspect they like. I mean, they should look at all suspects with some objectivity to try to develop the evidence to point to solving the case. But you talk about best practices. One of the problems we have is that once police and prosecutors get it wrong, they become wedded to their theory of the case. And even when you present exonerating evidence, I mean, I had my very first actual innocence case. We had the confession of the real killer that was taken by another law enforcement agency. It was Illinois' first use of DNA, where the DNA evidence showed that the person that confessed, who wasn't convicted, his semen was in the 10-year-old victim. And prosecutors still were going to allow 2 innocent men to die who had received a death sentence because they were wedded to their theory of the case. That's a rare case. I mean, ultimately, police and prosecutors got indicted for their misconduct. But that was the beginning of my foray into investigating these types of cases, and that was 22 years ago. And here we had all this overwhelming evidence, and if we couldn't get our guy out with that evidence, what does that say about our justice system? And even in more recent cases, and I'll talk a little bit about an Indiana case where a man has been sitting in prison for 12 years. He was a former Indiana State trooper. He came home after playing basketball with some of his fellow law enforcement officers, finds his wife and 2 children shot and killed in their garage. Police immediately, singled him out as the suspect. They fit the facts to fit their theory, and they disregarded evidence that was left at the crime scene by the actual killer. There was a sweatshirt that was left. The wife, David Cam's wife, was her pants were removed. Her shoes were taken off her feet and placed on top of the vehicle inside the garage. They were killed. She and her two children had just come home from swim practice for one of the kids. She was, she was shot and killed by a complete stranger. And it turned out that there was a prison-issued sweatshirt where the actual perpetrator, Charles Bonnet, was taking off his clothes and trying to commit a sexual assault. There was no evidence of semen, but what police later learned about Charles Bonnet, the man who left this sweatshirt, his DNA was on the sweatshirt. Ultimately, his palm print was in the vehicle where he reached in and shot the two children inside the vehicle.
And they managed to overlook all those pieces of evidence.
All of that. And now that it's come to light, this man still remains in prison. He is the ultimate crime victim. He lost his wife and two children in the most egregious, horrendous, heinous murder. And he's, has the fingers pointed at him. He gets convicted. And thank God.
What can we do to change the paradigm?
Well,
better training?
It's the overzealous prosecutors. They want to notch on their belt.
The one reform that we can enact in every state is setting up an Innocence Commission where you have evidence of actual innocence that comes to light, that the charging decision, whether this person remains in prison, shouldn't remain and be left in the hands of the prosecutors and police who got it wrong. There should be an independent authority that looks at this evidence objectively and says, you've got the DNA on the sweatshirt of a prison-issued sweatshirt left at the crime scene, and Charles Bonnet's palm print where he reached in and shot these kids. That's evidence exonerating David Kim. He should be released immediately. He shouldn't be there for 12 years, and he shouldn't have to be subjected to a retrial.
Has anybody ever done this successfully, created an Innocence Commission? It's an interesting concept.
Illinois is one of the best, and that's where Bill Clutter, who we're speaking with, he's a PI, and he's Bill. You have done just extremely a great job doing, especially the Julie Ray Harper case. One of the nicest ladies I've ever met, and I've been to conventions. And could you mention a little bit about Julie Ray?
Yeah, and that's another.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the Innocence Commission also. I'd like to see a little bit about how we could implement that.
Well, North Carolina is the first in the nation to implement it. Unfortunately, Illinois doesn't have an Innocence Commission. That's something that I'm working with, hoping to work with legislators next session on. But the case of Julie Ray Harper is another example where here's a woman who's going to college, getting her PhD at Indiana University. She has a 10-year-old son. She just goes through a bad divorce. Her husband marries a very politically connected circuit clerk in a county not far from where Julie lived. And she loses custody, not because she's a bad mother, but because the husband had married into a politically connected, Julie's attorney in her divorce actually withdrew because he was afraid of the repercussions of the new wife, her husband. And so this becomes the motive for murder when what happens is it's her visitation over Columbus Day in 1997 in October. In the middle of the night, she's awakened at 4 a.m. by a child's scream. It was so foreign to her that she couldn't imagine that was her own son. But she went into her son's bedroom across the hall. She didn't even pick up her glasses from the nightstand. She was in her nightshirt. It's dark. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. And she encounters what she thought was her son having a bad dream. He was up out of the bed, and then he smacks her, knocks her down. And then she's like dazed and confused, and she struggles to go after him. And this turns out to be one of the most horrific serial killers in the United States, Tommy Lynn Sells, who's on death row in Texas for a crime very similar to the murder of Joe Patek, who was 10 years old.
You were the one that caught him.
Right. Well, I didn't actually catch him, but what happened is in Illinois, because we had so many innocent people being exonerated, that in 2000, Illinois established reforms to establish resources to prove a person's innocence before they get convicted. That would hire investigators, like Paul Cialino in the case of Anthony Porter in Illinois that led to the moratorium. And so I was actually contacted by Julie's attorney. She was her client was under investigation for 3 years. She was facing the death penalty. She hadn't been indicted yet. And when I heard the story of the intruder that Julie described, I was actually investigating the case of Randy Steidle, where in that case I was looking at a guy named Tommy Linsells who just got arrested in Del Rio, Texas for the murder of Kayleen Harris, who was 10 years old. And he was someone that I was interested in the Randy Steidle case, and actually now have evidence that he committed that crime as well, 60 miles north of Lawrenceville, where Julie Ray Harper's son was killed. And so when I heard the description, I told the attorney that that would be the first lead that I would investigate if I was appointed as her investigator. And prosecutors made the decision not to seek the death penalty, not because they had a change of heart, but because they wanted to take away the resources that these reforms that were being enacted by not only the General Assembly and the governor, but the Illinois Supreme Court.
And Dave, if you ever met Julie Ray Harper, she is one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I mean, I couldn't see her hurting a fly. I mean, she's a sweetheart.
And it turns out,
it's extraordinary. Somebody like that could end up being convicted of murder.
Well, and yeah, she spent 2.5 years in prison, and it wasn't until a true crime author, Diane Fanning, was actually writing the book about Tommy Linsell that Diane Fanning sees Julie Ray on ABC 2020 telling her story for the first time, describing how she encountered this intruder in her house. And Diane Fanning writes to Tommy Linsell and says, of all the stupid things that these prosecutors were saying, I saw this program and the woman said she was innocent, and you think, oh yeah, right, but then you hear the prosecutor say that it's absurd that an intruder would break into a house and not arm himself with a weapon, that he would take a knife from the kitchen butcher block. And this is exactly what Tommy Linsell had done in Del Rio, Texas. And Diane Fanning said, even if I didn't know you, Tommy, I would think this woman was innocent. And he writes back and says, that murder you mentioned, did that happen 2 days before my Springfield, Missouri murder? Did that happen October 13th? And Diane Fanning had to...
I can't believe they said that she self-inflicted wounds on her back where she couldn't even reach.
Right, exactly. She had physical injury.
With a knife.
Struggle.
And the prosecutors, and
it's
the
amazing
judge.
she lived.
It is. Well, what happened, we ultimately find out when Sells eventually confessed to the murder, that he was startled when she came into the room and he dropped the knife. Otherwise, she would have been dead. But again, like David Kim in Indiana, who, walks in at a crime scene where his wife and 2 kids are murdered, Julie is the ultimate crime victim as well. I mean, she faces the horrific murder of her own son, that she's there when it happens, and then she gets accused of it. I mean, she's victimized by the justice system as well as by this serial killer.
She loses her kid, her 10-year-old kid, and then...
And the problem is, it's another example of tunnel vision, and the problem is that this guy, Tommy Linsell, goes on to kill again. When police get it wrong and they lock in on the wrong suspect, there's other victims that are, as in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about example of who is doing it right, and in terms of murder investigation, who is really your model of who a good capital crime investigator conducts themselves? Because as we said, you can't follow up every single lead. There's just not enough time in the universe to do that. So at some point you have to pick and choose. But the developing tunnel vision and getting completely invested and prosecuting that particular person that you have, that the prosecutor and the police have decided to prosecute, seems to be a primary cause in every one of these capital murder investigations where somebody innocent has been.
Well, some jurisdictions are trying to provide training to officers to guard against tunnel vision, and they provide officers with additional training to train them to actually follow not just a single lead, but follow out all the leads of all the potential suspects.
Now, there's an aftercare program like Laura Caldwell that helps people like a Julie Ray Harper that didn't get a settlement. And Laura has written about 12 books. She's an author. And she goes around and speaks. She couldn't be on the show tonight, but I would like her on the show. And she takes care of people that walk out of prison with a shirt on their back that have been in for 36 years. And they're innocent. And it's easier for a guy because they got DNA, and women don't have DNA. Like I know Ken Wydrop, he sued and he got a lot of money. But women have a tougher time. And a lot of people have a tougher time because they don't get money. I didn't get a dime for my innocence.
Those programs are so important, what Laura Caldwell does, because many of these people who are wrongfully convicted don't have strong family support. Some do, and they're fortunate to have it, but for those that don't, Laura is really a lifeline to making that transition.
Plus, she's an attorney and an author, and she is. I stay in touch with Laura. I go to the conventions, like the Underground, Cincinnati, and Troy, and Philly, and Laura has done like you. We're like minorities to try to help these people, like David C. Irons and I are doing this radio show, and we hope to go TV, and we hope to get my movie made with Brad Johns for New Zealand, because people are afraid that their dogs are going to be killed by Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Maricopa County. The votes were rigged. I got proof on that from Devin Spleener, who's a good friend of mine. And he does dirty tricks. So we have to get good politicians in there to straighten out this mess. And that's what David C. Irons is trying to get in touch with. We need visuals. We need a major motion picture. Not just Bill Williams going out and interviewing people. We need to get a major motion picture made. And I think ours is on our way with and I had to go out of the country. I had to go to New Zealand because no one's going to do it. But you and Laura and the Innocence Project has done just terrific jobs.
When is your motion picture going to come out?
The treatment's done. I just got the signed contract. If you see visuals of like Tent City and cockroaches and pigeon poop and freezing cold water that Sheriff Joe puts on, and the 143-degree temperatures, and he goes on Fox News. he's going to win. He's going to win the election because he's got nepotism. He owns the Arizona Republic. He owns the vending machines. He owns the. He gets the. It's county jail. It's probation. You know, it's not parole. These are minor crimes. People die on a weekly basis. They put a girl in a cage. Big deal. She did a minor crime, and she died of dehydration. You get no water. You got to drink out of the toilet for water. And people, American public does not know. He thinks he does sting operations with the Mexicans. I'm getting a little bit off track, David. You can stop me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was actually offline for a couple of minutes. My computer stopped working, but I have recorded the entire show up to now. We were talking, Bill, about best practices for prosecutors in police departments, and a question I'd like to ask is how do they decide what evidence to pursue, what suspects to pursue? Because eventually it comes to the point where somebody has to start selecting, and tunnel vision is really a big problem. There seems to be a lot of ego involved when they've selected a particular person to prosecute. Then all of the resources of that department seems to go towards prosecuting that person, and we need to have a paradigm shift from upholding your oath of office and or towards upholding your oath of office in a way from trying to prosecute. Essentially, it seems to be a numbers game for a lot of prosecutors. I have a 98 or a 99% prosecution rate. Well, if that was because they chose the person more carefully that they're going to prosecute, then by all means that's a positive thing. But if it means that once they have set their tunnel vision on a particular suspect, that they decide to go ahead and prosecute that person, irregardless of what the facts, what the additional evidence are. How can we get back to public officials that actually follow their oath of office, that actually do the right thing? Remember in Perry Mason, if you ever watch those shows, the prosecutor at Perry Mason lost every single case for I guess about 6 years in a row. But I admire the man. He was a man of integrity. He was out there to discover the truth, regardless of where that led him. Do you have any thoughts on that, Bill?
Well, I think you have to make police and prosecutors accountable. I mean, when they get it wrong, they shouldn't be given a free pass, as the direction of the U.S. Supreme Court seems to be going now.
Sure has.
It was a case a couple of years ago out of New Orleans where there was evidence of prosecutorial misconduct. It was withholding what's called exculpatory evidence, which is evidence that tends to prove the innocence of the person accused. And this individual was exonerated eventually after spending many years in prison, and his civil case was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court, in a very divided opinion, said that, well, we recognize that prosecutors acted badly in this case, but they have absolute immunity. We're not going to hold them liable. Well, if they have no accountability and no liability when their behavior is so egregious and violating the rules of discovery, there's no incentive for prosecutors to play it straight, and that's one of the problems. I mean, that's one of the things that needs to be changed. They have to be held accountable.
Immunity is only supposed to apply when the person who claims that immunity is following their legitimate function of office and acting legally. But once they've stepped out of their legal responsibilities, then they have lost that immunity.
They
Unfortunately,
have no
it doesn't seem that the Supreme Court has upheld that right, which is the right of us individuals to be safe from prosecution. If these egregious violations of human rights can go on to somebody like Alison, to the people that you mentioned tonight, who's safe? Nobody's safe out there as long as we have a system where they're completely unaccountable.
No, and until it changes.
It's a system designed for failure, and it's a big business, and prisons are getting more and more money, $6,000 per arrest for running a yellow light, and if they see your big house, they see your daddy's a lawyer, your poor little rich girl from Scottsdale, you're going to get it. You know, you're naive.
That is an alarming trend. I don't know if our guests can address that tonight, but that is something that certainly alarms me, and that there seems to be a perverse incentive for prosecutors and law enforcement officials to prosecute people who have money, and I hope that it doesn't develop into that, but it certainly has signs of that.
No, that would be a disturbing trend.
Well, unfortunately, it seems to be something that is pursued in municipalities all over this country, and that is, it sounds reasonable on the surface that prisoners who have been convicted of a crime should pay to stay in jail, to pay rent.
Yeah.
But that is a perverse incentive to want to go after people that really have some money. And I'm afraid what's going to happen is we're going to end up with a system where you're vulnerable if you have assets.
And that certainly seems to be happening in Arizona.
Arizona's the worst. Maricopa County. I loved Arizona. I would love to move back there, but it's rigged. You know, you don't want to. If you get the wrong cop or you get the correct fireman on a call, it could be two different stories.
That's
true.
Know? What were you saying, Bill, about how that seems to be happening in Arizona?
Well, I just, from what I read, that where they're actually charging inmates rent to be housed in the county jail, and that type of system certainly would certainly could lead to arresting those that could afford to pay the freight. I would hope that would not be the case, but I can see where that might open up.
It is.
Well, that's something they're starting to implement right here in Lansing, Michigan. And the concept really scares me. But
we need to stop it. We need to stop it with Americans, and I never considered myself a liberal. I'm always a Republican. I was raised that way. But, the minute I got in a false arrest, you have to take a look at the whole picture. And
well, I don't think this has anything to do with liberal versus conservative, and I think this is one area where a lot of people can get together. People have a liberal bend in politics. People have a conservative bend in politics. Because this is not about political philosophy. It's about right and wrong. It's about a legal philosophy, which is it's a whole different way of looking at things.
And Bill, you know I know Michael Moore. He's a very good friend of mine, and he has backed my project and backed it and backed it. I go to film festivals in Tucson. I can name names of Johnny Carson who passed, or but it doesn't seem right where people are incarcerated for minor crimes and they die in prison, and someone gets on Fox News with Sheriff Joe and wins an election. It puts people in tents. People die there, and you don't hear about them for a minor crime, like Gina Panetta. I interviewed her family, and the dad was just in tears. He's taking care of the 5 children. She didn't get child support. She stole $5 from a dollar store, and she got like 20 years in prison for not a crime she didn't commit, and she got cancer and died. And there's no medical attention, and we have to let Americans know. And a visual movie would show that. It would show the heat and the cold temperatures and everything else coming out. And Bill, do you have anything on this Kentucky guy that you can talk about?
Well, I'm doing work in Kentucky on death penalty cases, but the case of actual innocence is in Indiana, the David Kim case. If people are interested in learning more about his case, they can go to www.justicefordavidcam.com, I believe is the website.
Okay.
David Cam, can you spell that last name?
Yeah, the last name is C-A-M-M. First name is David Cam. But it's one of the more compelling cases I've ever seen, and it's just an absolute travesty of justice that he's still sitting in prison despite the overwhelming physical evidence that this criminal had committed this murder. The individual that committed the murder was literally released from prison after serving a long prison term for a very similar case in which he abducted women at gunpoint.
Well,
wow, that's extraordinary. How do you go about? Well, I have a couple of questions. First, how you go about investigating these questions, and secondly, it seems like a problem, as you mentioned in Julie Ray Harper's case. The problem is that the funds are not available for the defense. In fact, the prosecutor in Julie Ray Harper's case specifically did not pursue the death penalty because if they had, the funds would have been available for her to defend herself. Right. And by throwing her in prison, which would have been a life sentence anyways, but not pursuing the death penalty, the prosecution deprived her of those funds that she could have used to defend herself in court. And in your case, how can people afford to hire you?
Well, I mean,
it seems to be a big problem.
Most people can. Most of my cases are, where I'm court appointed, and there's, funds available to investigate death penalty cases. The majority of my work is on capital cases, and continues to be, even though Illinois has abolished the death penalty about a year and a half ago because of the long string of exonerations. But without those resources, someone like Julie Ray Harper is unable to investigate, do the legwork, and hire an investigator like me or anyone else who does this work to go out and develop the evidence that could prove that the prosecution police got it wrong.
That's often the case.
Her father is a minister.
In which the prosecutor dollars to bring in witnesses to testify in a capital case, but the defense is denied a few $100s or maybe even $5,000.
Well,
Let's get into public defenders. Like, my public defender lied to me, and I ended up going to the Hamptons.
To bring an investigator, capital case.
And I was lied to by a public defender named Jamie Nolan. And she changed her name because of my case.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the real world.
She was a wannabe prosecutor. She was fresh out of law school, and she completely, my case was so innocent. At the most,
unfortunately, that's often what happens. Is people don't realize that everybody in the system is really there to perpetuate.
But now my daughter's got a full ride to University of Michigan because I'm on self-assistance. And taxpayers need to know this. They're paying $40,000. It's been over $30 billion in waste of taxpayers' money. And I want to mention this because I spoke at the Occupy Phoenix event. $30 billion for false arrest.
It seems like eventually people would wake up.
Extraordinary amount of money.
What a waste of money. You know, that could go to college tuitions, to people that need scholarships. But no, it goes to cops eating at P.F. Chang's and not Dunkin' Donuts anymore. And overzealous prosecutors that live in huge houses. It doesn't go to you and I. And it ruins lives, and it ruins, it's a trickle-down theory. So many of my friends have been ruined by my tennis career was sabotaged, my reputation, and Americans and the liberal, the Europeans have not as many people in prison as in the state of Washington. Bill, do you have any answers to that?
I wish I did. You know, we incarcerate.
Well, you have part of the answer, which is why we have you on tonight. And well, let me ask you: if somebody does find themselves thrown into the system, like your clients, or Julie Way Harper does, can you give any advice to how you should conduct yourself? Should you answer them? Should you cooperate with the police? Should you not cooperate with the police? Should you demand a lawyer? These are some serious problems that people get into, and they're totally unprepared.
Well, obviously, if one finds themselves the subject of a police investigation, you know, the first thing is you definitely want to consult with a lawyer because you definitely want to know what your rights are. They can make inquiry and find out, you know, what exactly you're facing, because a lot of times police don't immediately tell a person, you know, why they're being questioned, and you know, try to catch them off guard. And you know, it's
remember your Miranda rights. You hear that on television all the time. You have the right to remain silent.
I was never read by Miranda rights. That's
oftentimes they don't.
But, you know, unfortunately, even though one can have all these safeguards that the Constitution provides, and it still doesn't. It's not enough to guard against a wrongful arrest and a wrongful conviction. I mean, the Bill of Rights was inspired by the Salem witch hunts that happened over 100 years before the founding of this country. when we were still Puritan colonies. The idea that you have a right to a jury of your peers instead of a tribunal of ministers, and we still had witch hunts. We have modern day witch hunts that occur even to this day. Unfortunately.
Well, once again, we need to come up with a solution. And I keep saying it's got to be a visual, so the world can see what happens in the court of law. And there hasn't been a movie out in a really long time. We can talk till we're articles or the Phoenix New Times, but we need to see a visual out on the big screen where people can actually see what is going on with our system in the wrong. And Bill, you are one that can help us out. People are scared. They're scared their dogs are going to be killed if they do something politically wrong.
So
you cannot go against the system. You can't go for the system, and we're in a deadlock.
Right.
Do you agree with me, Bill?
Well, I agree that it's an uphill fighting against the system, and that's a lot of times when people find themselves in the legal system. They're swimming upstream. Many of them are. They don't have the resources. They don't. Oftentimes, they don't have the best, and most competent legal counsel. So.
Well, a public defender is there to defend. They're not there to. I had a judge up in Seattle, and he's like, Alison, you can get the records. My public defender was fresh out of law school, had a baby out of wedlock, married James Nolan, and she lied. They lie. She said I was going to go to prison for 12 years if I didn't take a plea. And I saw it later on dispatch. The officer knew where my daughter was the whole time at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And the millions of dollars that we have spent and the millions of taxpayers' dollars, it's just so, and my daughter, she's doing fine. She's, like I told you before, her college is being paid for. But am I doing fine? Maybe not as well as Julie Ray Harper because she's stronger than me. I don't know. It's just like a dead-end street. That's why I'm doing the radio show, the movie, and I want to get this shown to the world. Do you have anything else to say?
Well, I think, just keep doing what you're doing. And, you're building a following, and, each thing you do, whether it be radio or talking publicly, it's all going to be helpful to the cause that you're promoting. And if you get a movie, that would be icing on the cake.
I think the movie's going to, with Rod Johns from Lord of the Rings, I think that could bring some light to the world, because articles, magazines, talk shows, David and I are looking into a talk show, which would be cool. We could have guests like you and Laura Caldwell promoting her books.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it looks like a lot of these cases that you have investigated would make great television programs. To do a streaming video webcast and to break those up and make them into professionally done TV programs is something that nobody else is doing right now. But we have the technology to put on that sort of a production, and whereas it used to cost $1 million for a studio, now just about every kid with a computer can put on videos.
That's right.
A lot of it's poor and very amateur quality, but it doesn't have to be that way.
But we had Dan on 2 weeks ago, and we had him on Skype, and we could actually see him on meetings, go-to meetings. And, you know, to watch him, he's so professional. He's a professor, and he did the economic value. And we're not just harping on people that were wrongfully accused. We're going for what it does to families, what it does to, it ruined like 10 years in my daughter's life and mine. I'm a single mom that doesn't get child support, and I'm on assistance. It really needs to be shown on the big screen, and I'm so happy to hear about Randy Stiles. That was cool.
Oh, it's an awesome story, because, you know, when I first met Randy in January of 1992, he was sitting on death row in Pontiac. He had been on a roller coaster in terms of the legal system, and today he's speaking before state legislators, convincing them to abolish the death penalty. He succeeded in New Mexico. He succeeded in Illinois a year and a half ago, and now he's got his sights on Indiana and Kentucky. He's speaking at 4 college campuses at the end of this month in Kentucky, trying to get his message out. So, you know, when you talk about, Alison, getting your message out, I mean, this is how it's done. It's, you know, just grassroots, going, you know, from audience to audience, college campus, town to town, telling these stories. And it worked in Illinois, and because of people like Randy Stiles, we no longer have a death penalty in Illinois, because we just don't know we're getting it right.
And like Ron Piney is awesome, and it's like people like me. Judge McVeigh said, Alison, you're one that's, I'm not homicidal. I'm not going to go kill the prosecutor or kill the public defender for ruining my life, or kill the judge. They're not going into the hood. When I was in Chicago and I was on a radio show, and he cut me off, and I go, no. I go, I'm not that, I wasn't born that way. You know, some people, when they're innocent and they get off, they're going to go after the prosecutors. The judge admitted in court he knew my personality. I'm not going to go hurt anyone. You know, I just want to tell my story, and I want to do. I look up to people like Julie Ray Harper and you and Laura Caldwell for writing and writing and writing about these innocent people. It makes sense. You don't have to go get out, and even though I lost those years of my child, CPS was never involved. It was all lies. So I just went on with my life. I took a different path. I still play tennis. And
Alison, is this leading up to a question for our guest?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so get back to. I'm sorry, I was cut off for a few minutes back there, but I was cut off twice during our conversation today, and I apologize because I know that I must have just disappeared right in the middle of a sentence. But you mentioned an intriguing idea, which is the idea of having an Innocence Commission, and how do we implement that? How was it done? Where was it done? Where was it done successfully? How did the Innocence Commission function? Did it have any power, or was it just advisory?
Well, it's the first in the nation. Was set up in North Carolina, and it was established by their Supreme Court. And they do have it's a 3-judge panel that hears evidence of actual innocence. They are independent of the prosecuting authority that got it wrong. They are independent of the court where it was originally tried. They have independent jurisdiction, and and it's worked well there. It does provide some objectivity in these cases where a lot of times it's lacking.
What is to protect the Innocence Commission from becoming corrupted? As there is so much corruption in our system right now that it seems hopeless at times. Is there a mechanism that's going to protect that? It seems to me a citizens commission would have some value in terms of having an Innocence Commission. In other words, if that commission were to rotate like a grand jury.
Well, the important thing about the Innocence Commission in North Carolina is that it's detached from the local jurisdictions that preside where the conviction was obtained. My experience in these cases is you go to the county level of the courthouse, and that's where you find the most corruption. And it's corrupted, and some of it's benign, where they're friends with the people that practice law in that jurisdiction. And so when you make an allegation that the attorney was ineffective and didn't actually represent you, they get a little bit jaded, and they get protective of the attorneys that practice in their jurisdiction. An Innocence Commission that's removed from that would be, just right there is a reform that could prevent some of that, that corruption we talk about.
Okay, and I hope you don't mind me playing devil's advocate, because it pays to look at these things from both ends and to look at the possible downsides of implementing a commission like that. And we've all seen that wonderful ideas seem to happen, and sometimes they seem to work for a while, but oftentimes these organizations tend to become corrupt, just as regulators tend to be captured by the system. And with a large system with lots of money and lots of people with their careers invested in it, you can see how that sort of corruption tends to creep in.
Well, he has some experience in government and politics.
Well, I've been jaded by my experience in government and in politics. Oftentimes, our guests talk about how it seems to be an anomaly that they've run into a bad judge or a bad prosecutor, but mostly they're good, honest people. And I have to say that I keep hearing about the honest judges and the honest prosecutors that are really doing a good job out there, but in my experience, I don't run across them. I see judges that lie and break the law. I've seen more crimes committed in court than I could possibly imagine, and the prosecutors seem to be just as willing to lie and cheat in order to prosecute. And in this case, we're talking about prosecuting innocent people, and I'm sure everybody on the call tonight has had experience with that.
Well, unfortunately, that is the problem with in some of these cases. You get cases like Randy Stiles, where you actually had prosecutors who were corrupt because they were backed by elements of organized crime. It's like the movie The Godfather. Where they control the politicians, they control the judges, they control, and it's all through the political process. And reality is that sometimes the way things work in the real world.
Did you see a show on 48 Hours? That was so good. And I did read his book that was out, and I had the chance to meet Randy Stiles in Philly at the death penalty conference. What a nice guy.
Great guy.
26 years in prison. And to see the pictures, because I bought his book, to see the pictures of him and his brother getting him out, and similar stories like Ray Crone. 11 years in prison, 100 exoneree. And I just can't imagine Gloria Julian. 26 years for crimes she didn't commit.
No, it's travesty.
No, Pete, and I go into these places, and I'm like, yeah, I had 8 days, 12 days for not having a full-time job after they took away my career and lied to me in a plea agreement. And these people, I have to face these people, and they got 36 years, and they get nothing to shirt off their back. And they're the most wonderful people you've ever met. How they can walk away. I guess they found God in prison or something. I don't mean to laugh about it.
Some do.
And people like Ron Kiney's case of the guys that he went to jail with, he is the only one that survived. All the rest of them have been killed in gangland slayings and suicides, and it takes a strong person to survive after going through an experience like that. The experience is so horrific. In Alison's story, I think illustrates that. Alison was only in jail for a few days, and she's traumatized by it. She's experiencing post-traumatic stress syndrome, and just imagine somebody spent 26 years.
My attorney, because it wasn't a child abuse case, but I taught kids tennis my whole life since I was 15, and when they shackled me and I passed out, my lawyer is like, his name was Daniel and Sarah. He's so cool. He took me pro bono. He was like, he goes, God, it would have been like you were going through the death penalty. And I had 8 to 12 days in jail. But that's when the girls beat on you.
Oh, my gosh.
They have the girls' prison in Tin City. They have a life sentence, and they're headed for prison. And me, I mean, there's drug dealers. I never saw a drug in my life, and never been camping before. And I'm crying my head off. They're gonna pick on me. My nickname was Scottsdale. I lived.
Well, Alison, we're getting near the end of the hour, and I would like to ask our guest if he has any closing remarks, any words of wisdom that you'd like to end this program with.
Well, I'd just like to encourage everyone who works to assist the wrongly convicted to, keep up the work they're doing, like, getting the word out like Alison's doing, and Randy Steidle and Julie Ray Harper. They're all, speaking out and trying to educate people. I think that, that those that might be interested in getting involved in this type of work, I'd be happy if they want to, contact me, give them guidance on how they can get plugged into, working for a local Innocence project where they live. I mean, they're always existing volunteers. So,
Lansing's a good one.
I appreciate you having me on the show. And
yes, we just interviewed somebody last week, Monica Jansky, that is working for a prisoner reentry program. So it is wonderful that you're interested in taking on people and perhaps giving them some very interesting volunteer work to do. And I think that is probably one thing that makes an impression on somebody that lasts the rest of their life. I've never seen anybody that's involved in ex-offenders and prisoner reentry and the Innocence program that ever went back to their previous way of thinking, that the courts run are okay, and that everybody in prison is guilty, and people just haven't gone back to that way of thinking. Because once your eyes are open,
if I could leave my website, www.backspinmymovie.com, with backspin, because my life went backward. This will be on YouTube and on my website, so we can all hear it. If someone missed it, like I know Julie Ray missed it tonight. So it's www.backspinmymovie.com. It will be posted within the next couple days on my website, and it will be posted on YouTube.
Okay. Hey, Bill, if you could give our listeners some contact information also, if we have people that are interested in volunteering and interested in getting some more information, how would they contact you? How would they find out some more information?
They can email me. First name is Bill, last name is Clutter, Clutter, @email.com. And I look forward to their inquiries.
Okay, and if you have anyone that wants to be in our show to tell their story,
I'll send them your way.
That would be great, Bill.
You should talk to Randy Steidle at some point. He would, I'm sure, would be lovely.
I did Facebook him. I'm so proud of him.
Okay, with that, I'm going to end the interview, and we can continue this conversation.